Well, for all the talk, we now have a first poll looking at voter reaction to Labor's changes to stage 3 tax cuts. Joining me now is independent MP Allegra Spender. Allegra, thanks so much for your time. We spoke last week about the broken promise, the empathy angle to all of this, and just the raw figures on whether people do vote in self-interest. What do you make of this news poll? And it's not definitive, but it is interesting. 62% of people support Labor's changes. I would have thought it should have been a lot higher for Labor. What do you think?
Look, to be honest, I'm surprised it's not higher. And, you know, when I look at Wentworth, which is one of the electorates most affected by these changes in the sense that has the biggest group of people who will lose out from these changes, I think that's probably at the low end of the support I've seen so far from Wentworth, actually. So I think you're right that people are worried about the broken promise piece. But I think also, certainly what I'm hearing is that a lot of people really need support right now, and you know they're looking at whatever support they can get, and are very grateful for it. But you know, as you and I talked about before, there are a bunch of people out there, you know, who are relying on it, and who are also gutted that they're not going to get what they had expected, and so you know some of their choices that they've made right now are also going to be pretty tough. Yeah,
I imagine there's a lot of people out there that want to keep more of their own money, and they don't approve of how the government is essentially spending their money from time to time either. But what is it in Wentworth? Is it this relationship between essentially being told that if you earned 180 grand a year that you're rich, but also at the same time there's article after article telling you that if you live in Australia you need to be earning 184 grand a year in order to be able to afford to buy a house?
Yeah. Look, and I think, to be honest, you hit the nail on the head. Housing is the biggest issue. It's the biggest cost of living issue in Wentworth and anywhere in the country. You know, the average rent of a unit in Bondi is $900 a week. Now, if you don't want to be, you know, in what they call, you know, rental stress, where you're spending more than 30% of your income on rent, you need to earn 150 grand. So that's really what people, you know, in Wentworth are facing. They just have really high rents and mortgages. But frankly, you know, it's across the country. And I think that's the biggest issue, that, you know, older generations, people who own their own homes, are still worried about their kids and their grandkids. And, you know, younger generations are just feeling completely locked out. And so what I've been saying, you know, sort of over the last week or so is to say, look, you know, the biggest issue that we need to be facing is intergenerational equity, making sure that younger Australians aren't locked out. And we need to look at the tax, you know, broader tax reform to make sure that the tax system is supporting that as well.
No one really seems up for that debate except for you, to be honest. So when we talk about tax reform, are you talking about putting GST back on the table, actually having a system that is fairer? Because, I mean, most economists say you reduce income tax, you put up the GST like the VAT in the UK, and you end up with a much fairer system. Do you agree with that?
Look, I think there are lots of different ways and to make the system work better for the country. And, you know, for me, the biggest three issues with our tax system are firstly that intergenerational equity piece. You know, we've got younger people who are locked out of housing, but at the same time, we're seeing, you know, fewer and fewer of older generations paying tax. So only 17% of older Australians now pay tax, and that used to be 27%. So what's the solution to that? Well, I think it is. I think we do need to look at the income tax system. I agree. We need to reduce our reliance on income tax, but we need to work out, well, how else can you pay for it? I think the second major issue that we have is also is about productivity and economic growth. Because if you want to, you know, build more hospitals, build more schools, you know, the best way to do that is actually make sure the economy is working well. You know, Ken Henry said that, you know, if we had, you know, strong productivity growth in the last 20 years, we could have up to like $50 billion more in the federal budget to pay for things that matter. So that's where things like company tax reform is really important as well. Yep. And then finally, climate. You know, we're not taking the lowest cost approach to climate action. You know, we have to take climate action, but let's do it in a way that, you know, we're not sort of, you know, encouraging fossil fuel consumption on one side through things like the fuel tax rebates, you know, for diesel engines, while on the other side saying, no, we need to take real climate action. And so I think everything should be on the table. You know, GST should be on the table. I don't think it's the panacea. It's not going to fix all ills. But, you know, you can in the past and in the future. I think that there is a role for GST reform as well. And I'll be presenting some options to my community come the middle end of the year and get some feedback on different options that include potentially include the GST, but certainly we're working through everything with everything on the table.
So you haven't quite finalised those options yet, or are you just keeping them secret from me?
No, I'm not keeping them secret from you. No,
Okay.
Trying to finalise the options. And we want to put them, I want to give, Wentworth, but also the broader community, a chance to talk about different sets of options for tax, because you won't get that from the major parties. You're not going to see so far. I haven't seen green papers or, the hint of that. But what I've said before is that, honestly, if the government is not going to be able to go to the next election and say, like it did last time, don't worry, we're not going to touch tax. It's not possible, because they're going to have every ad campaign in the history saying, broken promises. So I think they should get on the front foot and say, you know what, this is the time for some broader tax reform. Let's get options on the table before the election so that we can take something coherent to the public.
Well,
and the opposition needs to do the same thing.
Yeah, it's certainly opened up a few fronts that I don't think Anthony Albanese is quite willing to talk about at the moment. But I finally just want to ask you about Daniel Mookhey today. It was in Fairfax 9 newspapers talking about the need to actually get on the front foot with the housing crisis. Yeah. It is a crisis. He's warning that if we don't actually make proper headway here, Sydney could end up being San Francisco. Do you think that is, a bridge too far, or do you think that's about right?
Look, I think housing is frightening, and I think we absolutely need to take action on housing. I think we've had 20 years at all levels of government of kicking that can down the road. And I think it's heartbreaking that, young people doing good jobs, like doing jobs that help the whole community, like, teaching, like being a paramedic, on 2 incomes. They don't, unless they get help from mum and dad, they don't have a good chance of being able to, buy a home and raise a family like every other generation has in the past. So, I'm really concerned on housing, but I'd challenge the state government to say, well, look, you talk a big game on housing. Why aren't they looking at things like, stamp duty? Because the Treasury, New South Wales Treasury, said 350,000 people, more people in New South Wales, would have access to be homeowners if they would only look at reforming stamp duty and moving to land tax. So, I think he's right to say
the Perrottet
we're worried,
model,
but he also needs to take it. Look, the Perrottet model wasn't perfect, but it was a start. And it was, I think, pure politics to abandon that. And I think they need to acknowledge that and get back on the foot and say, 350,000 people in New South Wales could be homeowners if they would actually face up to the changes that they need to make on stamp duty. And it is time they took that on.
And just quickly, no one is talking about the number of construction firms that are actually going broke every week, particularly in New South Wales. That's surely got to be a huge problem because we, again, don't have the workers.
No, I think that's absolutely right. And look, we're going to see the master builders this week. And I think that's a big question. How do we get the right people into the country? How do we also build those skills and build those skills quickly in our community so that we can build this and make sure that we're not, pushing everyone onto public building, which is all very important. But frankly, if that's stopping us building homes, that's a real problem as well.
All right, so much more to talk about. We'll have to leave it there today. Allegra, we'll see you soon.